so that you know a little bit about the summit, and for anyone who's new as well, I'll just explain that whilst I'm letting people in, and kind of what it's all about, and then we'll dive in after I've introduced you, if that's all right with you. Yeah, so my kind of this kind of summit is all about self-rediscovery, and for me that's kind of been my journey, and I think a lot of people come to the idea of self-rediscovery from a kind of idea of thinking that we need to fix, change, and do things in the external to make ourselves feel better. But my journey was kind of very much three principles grounded, and seeing that the world kind of operated in an inside out world, I guess. And so it became less about exploring, fixing and changing who we are in human form. But then I kind of came to a place with that where I dropped into this knowing of who we are. And then the second part of my journey was about seeing that actually, no, it's not about evading kind of our humanness. It's about embracing it. And so I love what you share, because it's all about kind of embracing our humanness and our human bodies. So to me, that feels really important. And I know, I'm hoping that you'll dive into a little bit about this kind of ascension and dissension stuff that we've chatted about before, because I think that's really, really great to explore. But really, yes, it's about now this self-rediscovery is seeing who we are beyond our ideas, but also kind of then dancing in who we want to be and who we desire to be. So this is perfect for that. And we've heard from lots of different speakers, and I think it's always about helping people to tune into what's true for them as well. So that's kind of the aim of this kind of summit. Is kind of evolved into more of a live podcast, I guess, because there's been so many. But it's been a lot of fun. So these conversations are always great to dive into. I'm always kind of on hand in the Self-Rediscovery Facebook community to offer any support to anyone who has questions. And this session really is about kind of really us exploring and hearing what you've got to say, but also we do open it up to live questions and answers, if that's okay with you as well. So
okay.
Yeah, so that's what it's all about. I'm going to do a little bit of an intro to you. I know I've been listening to your podcast Primal Happiness for like years, basically. So yeah, I love what you do. And I know recently kind of we've connected a bit more, and you describe yourself so beautifully as a creatrix and wayfinder devoted to what you call as waking the wild through soul-led, open-hearted sovereignty. So yeah, exciting. I'm kind of excited to dive into what all of that means. and yeah, so welcome. I know this is going to be a lot of fun, a lot of rediscovery for people. Just to introduce you, before we go into more human conversation, you're a coach, teacher, writer, podcaster, and the co-founder of Primal Happiness. Your mythical journey began when you leapt from the corporate leadership onto the path of spirituality after you suddenly and somewhat mysteriously recovered from 15 years of chronic pain and anxiety. That inexplicable transformation led you to immerse yourself in discovering what creates struggle, and conversely, how to create a life overflowing with happiness, love, beauty, and meaning. Your work today is focused on leading men and women along the path of waking the wild, a deep exploration of embodiment, heart, soul, and sovereignty. And you live in a 400-year-old quintessentially English country cottage, which I love seeing on Facebook, by the way, with your husband, 2 children, an array of ginger rescue animals, and you're living into the vision of creating a world of wild souls set free to be their unique magic. So yeah, that just really, that calls to my soul. So I'm really excited to dive into all of that. And yeah, just, I guess it's now a good time to just hand over to you, really. I always invite people when they first come on to kind of share a bit of their own personal journey, because everyone loves a shared story. So I just wondered if you could start there with kind of your own journey of self-rediscovery and waking the wild.
Thank you. It's interesting, whenever I'm asked that kind of question, I then notice I feel like I've elevated out of my storyline, and I'm looking down thinking, which bit? And I'm there hovering right now thinking, what's going to be, I guess, most juicy, most useful, most relevant. And I feel like actually what might be quite helpful is through the lens of what you were talking about, I often share this idea of ascension and descension, and I have two parts of my story that talk to both. So I'll do them in a nutshell rather than talk for too long, because I really love, you know, the idea of us kind of co-creating this rather than me just sitting here talking.
Yeah.
But that feels like might be the most helpful place to go. So as you just heard in what you read there about my story, I had been kind of trundling along, living, I guess, at a surface level, a fairly, what most people would call a sort of happy, successful life in many of the ways that we would measure happiness and success in this world. I ticked most of those boxes. And then the kind of like the deeper piece that most people honestly didn't know about me was this chronic facial pain that I had at that point had for 15 years. And I had tried lots of things to cure that. And after about, I think, the 3-year mark, even me, I mean, I'm a committed person. I will keep going. I think after about 3 years or so, I was like, you know what, I'm done. I'm just going to find a way to live with this. So by this point, where it had been going on for 15 years, it just become kind of part of the scenery, you know, it's like the wallpaper. And going back a year before the 15 years mark, my dad had suddenly died. And it's only really in hindsight I can really see that that was the piece that unlocked a lot of what came next. And that was really the start of this journey to what I now describe as ascension. And we can talk about this in all sorts of ways, but ultimately it's that connection to all that is. We might call that spirit, we might call that oneness, we might call that non-separation, we might call that innate well-being. There's so many different words, but it's that who we are before the thoughts, before the beliefs, before the stories.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the language for it then. It happened very spontaneously. So I was actually spending, like, I think a year just looking, thinking, what's happened to me? On the one hand, I've got all of this. I mean, my father died under circumstances that created a kind of lot of chaos in this kind of material world. And so that was all true. And yet I felt this growing sense of peace and love and well-being that I couldn't explain. And then it was a year to the day almost after my dad died that I read a single line that said something like, thoughts create your reality. And in that moment, the kind of remaining, I guess you could say, beliefs that at that point had felt really true, suddenly, like, it was like, I remember it was visibly going around me like a carousel. Like I could see all these thoughts going around me like, wow, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, that was a thought, that was a belief, oh my gosh. And it was a week after that, I was driving my children to school and I had this real sort of funny sensation of like, I've lost something, what is it? And I was kind of looking, you know, you sort of like pat around your car seat, like I've got my bag, got my children's packed lunch, got my children. We nearly let go of a child today. We bought a fire pit, my husband and I, at a garden centre. We couldn't fit the 2 children and the fire pit in the car. We consider ditching a child. Anyway, in this story, I had both children, and then I suddenly realised, oh my goodness, it's the pain. The pain's gone.
Wow.
And it was such a strange feeling, having carried it like a bag or my arms or my children for that long. It actually was quite a disconcerting feeling, thinking, wow, it feels odd, like I've lost something I should have. So that really was the point where I was thinking, okay, something profound has happened. I didn't choose this. I didn't make it happen. I don't even really know what has happened, but I'm going to find out. And so that was in 2013. And so I spent probably about 2 or 3 years immersing myself in various forms of, I guess, non-dual spirituality, including the 3 principles, really understanding that we aren't this kind of self-created belief about ourselves. And that I wouldn't say. I think because for me that transformation was so profound and so um spontaneous. I don't think it really deepened. I think I was like, I think it's
Mm,
unusual it happens that way, but it wasn't like that really changed. That was a kind of quite a constant from that moment. Nothing really changed. I just got to understand it better. I got to understand how to speak about it better, how to share that with others better. That's really what
yeah,
happened.
yeah.
And then I think probably if we then skip a few years, I mean,
Mm.
stuff happened, but I don't think anything we necessarily have to talk about for the purpose of this story. Um, it was probably about 3 or 4 years ago where I started having this first call into what I now call the descent. And I'd see that as very much a descent into the body, into the soul, into the earth, into this realm that we've chosen to come here to be, play out these lives, dance here as humans. And initially, that was very much more through the lens of, I guess, the human body rather than this idea of soul. Initially, it was very much about kind of understanding what works for humans from
Mm,
this embodied sense, like what serves us, how do we thrive in this world, which for most of us, we're not living the way that we've been designed to live for
yeah,
how we were, you know, most of our history on this planet we've lived. So that was the start of it. And then as time went on, really started to understand it feels like there's something else in this conversation that I've been missing. And this is, I mean, again, you can use many words for it, but for me, soul is the word that speaks most clearly to it for me.
mm,
And realizing that the more I could attune to that place inside myself through this mechanism of the body, the more aligned, alive, vibrant, fulfilled, creative, all of those things came from that part of the journey, the descent.
yeah. Wow, I love that,
So
and
does that
it's
help? So that's kind of like
yeah.
the two sides of the journey.
I do love that, and it's really funny because my journey is very similar to you. I kind of came across the principles, and it was so profound. But I think I first misheard that there was nothing to do, and that it's just a thought, so it doesn't matter. And then I kind of realized, no, actually every thought's a gift, and we get to play with that in our human form. And so to me, it kind of feels very similar to what you're saying there. But the soul bit and yeah, kind of intrigues me, and I love how you kind of dive into this kind of embracing the body. So yeah, this is very exciting. So what do you mean? I guess we're here to talk about desire and soul. So I guess what do you mean by those things?
Hmm. So, firstly, let's talk about this idea of soul. And it's funny because I did a podcast a week or so ago where it was the first time I think I really started from that idea of let's just agree that if we're going to have this conversation, we kind of need to agree that we're going to use this word soul and kind of agree on a definition. And that isn't because I want to convince anyone of that. It's
No.
just that in order to even have a conversation, we need to kind of come to some agreement of this
Yeah.
is sort of how it looks to me. Does it look like that to you? If not, what does it look like? I'm not here to impress my views on anyone.
I think we
But
all have our own different labels for these things as well. So it's just one form of it, but we're all kind of pointing in the same direction as well.
yes, exactly. And I think the words are useful because, hey, we're here and that's how we
Yeah,
communicate.
yeah,
But they can also get in the way when we get hung up on it needing to be fitting that particular way
yeah,
of describing it. But I notice the more people I speak to about these things, the more people I coach, the more people I teach in different classes, it doesn't take too long for people to get a sense of what I'm talking about and how that feels to them. And
yeah,
so I again often use the Rumi quote where it's kind of, we're not a drop in the ocean, we're the ocean in the drop. And it's like, for me, that drop has specific qualities. It's not
mm,
just a drop like any other. Like, yes, it's a drop of the ocean, And the very fact it's come here as this particular drop in this moment in time, in this particular form, it has something unique about it. It has
Ooh, I love
qualities that
that.
aren't the same as someone else and someone else and someone else.
Yeah, so we're
And
all different drops.
exactly. And
Whilst being the same.
yes. And I think again, that's the paradox in the dance, is to see that, we don't have separation because we are the ocean, and
Mm,
yet we have this unique gift that we are, that is that part of us that's different. The
mm,
way that we've chosen to come here now, as we are here, is the thing that's the gift.
yeah,
And I call that soul. But again, whether you call it soul or not, I think everyone has this kind of sense there's something within them that has a quality. I mean, how do you know for sure? It's not like I have an experience of being inside you and having an experience of you. But hey, the more I notice I speak from that place and to that place, the more it seems that people are able to embody and express that unique gift that they are, which
yeah.
again for me is what creates this like the juiciest experience of life we can have, when we're able to just like be who we are.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I'm just trying to think if I have a word for it. And I guess to me that almost is what I talk about when I talk about humanness. But that, I know again that's another label that can be used for lots of different things. But soul also kind of speaks to me, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. So a desire.
Yes, so
How does
desire.
that
So
come into
I just
it?
wanted to check that you didn't want to ask anything else first about soul, but I can absolutely be able to desire. So desire is, I find it a really interesting thing to explore, because it very much has had a bad rap. It's often seen as the kind of path to like lust and evil, and doing things from a kind of like selfish kind of like, oh, I've got like an urge to do something.
Mm.
And of
Which
course, that
spirituality would kind of judge as ego, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And yet I see that the more we're tuning to life from this open way of being, and so open-bodied, open-hearted, from there, that sense of when we're feeling a call towards something, we can feel the flavor of it is love.
Mm,
That's how, to me, how I think we start. And this isn't a kind of like, oh right, okay, now I know that, I'm going to go like, I know now the difference. This very much is something that we begin to attune to. Again, so much again of this journey is into our bodies, so that we can feel the difference. This is how we feel it. We can feel the difference in our bodies when we're open, when we're closed. We can feel the difference in the bodies when something's fueled from fear or when it's fueled from love. And more I notice that when I am able to feel a desire and realize like this isn't coming from a desire to just fit in
mm,
or be safe or have my needs met, which are all, having your needs met is really important, but that's not the kind of desire I'm talking about here. I'm talking about this like very deep, again, for me, that soul-led desire. It
mm,
has a texture, a tone to it that's unmistakable.
mm.
And often it doesn't really make sense. It's not like it has a logical, oh, if I do that, I'll get this, or
Yeah.
that will allow me to look better, or I don't know, get all the money, whatever it might be. There's almost like often like an illogic to it built in, where it's just like, do you know what? This is for me, and I don't know why, but it is. Like
Yeah.
that's that feeling that to me comes from that soul-led desire.
I love that. And Elizabeth Lovius last week was talking about the difference between kind of conditioned action and inspired action. And that kind of
Mm.
speaks to me of that a little bit, I think.
Yes.
That kind of
Mm.
illogical, like when you're not in the thinking,
Mm.
almost, it's like, yeah, that's how it kind of makes sense to me. I don't know if that's right. It's like when you kind of drop out of your head and into your heart more.
Yes, exactly. Which is why so much of the work that we do at Primal Happiness, like often we will use the language of the heart, because that is often where we really feel it.
Mm,
And again, this is why is, thoughts are great. We can, often we will need to use thinking to create things.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about here is felt in the body. It's
Mm.
feelings. And
Yeah, I love that, because again, it's like in the three principles, we're kind of saying, well, thought creates feelings, but actually, what you're saying is that feelings are kind of an indication of something or some information about something that's felt in the body.
yes. And as you know, I'll often make this distinction between, we use this word feelings, and often we'll use it and be kind of gesturing towards emotions.
Mm.
And then sometimes we're like, but hang on, maybe we do mean like feelings in our body, like touch, taste. And for me, that's really helpful to illuminate that both have information, but in our culture, typically, we are semi-attuned to our emotions. Mostly we're scared stiff of them. Mostly we try to like close them down, disassociate, numb them. We have we usually have a bit of a sense of them. What we really, really lack is being in our body, really that felt sense, which, if the more work I've done in this area personally, it's actually blown my mind how dead I was, how numb I was, even just a couple of years ago. I think, wow, as a species, it's like we've just like lost, I don't know what percentage, but I would actually say a massive percentage of our power through
Mm.
losing our felt sense.
Yeah,
Um,
I remember
I'm
you.
watching a
So,
series called C at the moment. It's got Jason Momoa in it, and it it's to do with a kind of, I think it's set in the future. I can't remember how many years in the future, but the human race have completely, the survivors of some kind of pandemic, I think, have lost their sight.
mm.
And as you're seeing the characters go around this world, this new world, without sight, it's incredible. Like they are like how we witness dogs or animals in the wild. Like the other senses are so attuned. And I
Which I
watch
guess
that and I
that
think
kind of,
that is what's available to us.
yeah, and we
Yeah,
talk
we don't
about,
have to even lose our sight.
yeah, we talk about deeper listening in the principles a lot, and I think it's almost kind of, the senses are kind of a way of accessing that deeper listening in a
Mm.
way. And what I loved about, I remember you saying, we think that we've got five senses, but actually there's like loads,
Yes.
which is amazing. And I
Mm.
can't quite remember what they are, but even kind of our wisdom is a sense, really. It's that kind of intuition. And yeah, there's loads of, that kind of surprised me. I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Like there's not just five, there's
Yes.
loads.
But again, most people would say that we only have five because probably that's mostly all they're aware of, and barely even those.
Yeah.
And it's not to diminish the beauty and power of those, but again, more and more I notice how much more is available. Like, for example, if I'm sitting with someone in a coaching session now, so much of the time I'll be aware of kind of like what's coming up in my body, like moments where I'll start to feel myself close and then choosing into opening again, and then a kind of sensation where I'll notice like, oh, that's a nudge to look there, to take notice of what's just been said. And all of this will be happening not in terms of those five senses. This is inside my body, is internal senses,
Mm.
which again, we are not at all, not even, I'd say, it's the opposite of us being guided into those senses in our culture. We're actually guided out of them. We're conditioned out of them. We're
Yeah.
told things like, you're too sensitive. We're
Yeah.
told things like, no, this is when to eat, this is when to use the loo, this is when to go to sleep. We're told not to listen to those senses.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, for anybody who's kind of maybe not quite feeling into that, whether you can give an example of that in kind of the context of how desire might feel in the body, because we're talking about desire as a compass, right? So I don't know if that would be quite useful.
I would say that first and foremost, it seems to me that everyone has their own unique way of feeling these things. And so what I always invite people to do is start to place their attention to how that shows up for them in their body,
Yeah.
because it actually can be really, really varied. And so sometimes I'll give clients simple exercises, like to start to notice, like ask themselves really simple questions. and notice like what feels like a yes and what feels like a no in their body.
Mm.
And for some people, that can be colors. Some people, that can be a feeling like a prickling in the fingers, or a kind of like warmth in the heart, or actually a kind of like clear word that comes in.
Yeah.
And so it's actually quite surprising, like how much variety is there.
Yeah.
I tend to, and I notice also it seems to depend on what the, it's hard to put the desires into categories, but I notice for different things, I often feel them in different parts of my body too. But this has all been like, it's all there, it's all available for us to pay attention to, it's all going on, but it's only when we start to pay attention that we'll notice it's there. It can really sort of go on in the background before we start to notice that.
Yeah, that's a really cool exercise for people, I guess, to sense into for themselves. Maybe if anybody wants to share in the chat how that's feeling for them, if they're thinking about something that they desire, then that would be cool to play with as well. I don't know if anybody's kind of going to want to do that, but if they do, you're very welcome. But yeah, no, I love that. And it is just, again, that awareness, isn't it? It feels of becoming more aware of it. But yeah, no, I love that. So I guess, yeah, we were here to talk about kind of desire as a compass to living a soul-led life. So I don't know if you want to kind of explore that a little bit.
So it reminds me, actually, I wrote a post this morning that was talking about what I've discovered over the years since I made, and it was a very, very much a commitment. There was a point where I suddenly thought, and who knows why, but it just occurred to me, like, this is a decision I'm actually ready to make. Like, I am going to live from soul. And I made that declaration out loud to my coach at the time and said, from now on, I don't even know what that's going to be. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't even know what that's going to require of me. And it is quite scary, but that's my commitment. And the post I wrote this morning was saying, like, I could not have predicted where that would take me. It's I mean, I love where it's taken me, but I really would not have predicted it. Like, it just, like, just through the frame of the work I do is so different from what I was doing, say, 4 years ago. And all of that has been led from that place of kind of feeling into, like, is this calling to me? Is this calling to me? And this is the interesting piece, where often as we start to get attuned to that sense of that's calling to me, so again, this is what my heart desires, it doesn't mean it won't come with fear. And so this is the tricky piece. It's like, on the one hand, we can be called to something through fear, but even when we're being called to it from desire, from soul desire, it sometimes does still come with fear, because it
I was going to
requires
say
something of us.
that's something I was just wondering. I was like, how far is it that we don't allow ourselves to be aware because it feels scary?
Yes. Well, that to me, I think, is really, like, probably the biggest gauntlet. That part where we say, I don't know what this is going to look like. I don't know what this is going to require of me. And I'm going to say yes anyway.
Yeah.
And I notice there's a point where I'm working with women in Waking the Wild Feminine, where I make that invitation to them to, whatever language they want to use, but make that same kind of commitment for themselves. And they always say the same kind of things, like, oh my goodness, it feels really scary. I don't know what I'm going to end up doing. And it's funny, it's like we think our soul's going to, like, make us do crazy stuff, like run down the street naked. Like, why would it do that? But it's just something about our imaginations, because I know myself, it is like, what would it have me do? And yet we know that in order to be true to that commitment, we do need to surrender to whatever it is calling us to do.
Yeah.
And so
I guess
what I've seen,
the ascension kind of part of the journey almost helps us to make sense of that in a way, because it's like we begin to understand the fearful thinking and feel more settled that there is kind of a wisdom to what our soul wants us to do.
Yes, I love that you brought that in. So I see that people who have had a taste of that path first, which most of my clients have one way or
Mm.
another. And it does provide a kind of safety.
Yeah.
Like, it does make you think, well, there is something beyond this moment, this experience.
Mm.
And that does provide definitely a sense of kind of like safety, but as you say, almost like an intelligence that's built in.
Yeah,
So
that's how it feels to me,
yeah.
and that was kind of how my own journey felt, and that's why my programs are designed in a kind of similar way to you, with that kind of ascension, descension kind of path, because it feels like the one program I offer is kind of the intro program, is like Self-Rediscovery Foundations, which feels like that kind of very settled grounding in kind of seeing that there's something more and there's a wisdom to life. But then it's like, well, now who do we want to dance as is the second part of the journey. So I love
Yes.
that. Yeah, that really speaks to me.
Yes, I very much see the same. I think it does provide this, like, we don't need to take it quite so seriously.
Yeah.
And yeah, not to diminish the fact, like, it can still be scary.
Yeah.
And I think I'll give an example of that actually from earlier in this year, where I felt this was the universe, like, totally had the last laugh with this bit, just to say. Spoiler alert. But I started the year thinking, this year I'm going to finally start speaking on the stage. Like, I do every other kind of public speaking possible, but the one thing I really hadn't done was get on the stage. That's because I was scared to do it. And then at the start of this year, it was just like, no, it's time. I can feel it. And it was very much, again, that kind of like soul-led desire was to do that.
Yeah.
And it really scared me.
Yeah.
Like, it's not to say that, like, just because I could feel this is for me, it didn't make it not scary. It was
No.
both.
Yeah.
And I think we get better at discerning that, yes, the desire is coming from that soul place, and it's okay to have some fear about it too. Like,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
And of course, then I think I did one talk, and then lockdown happened. Well played, universe. Yes.
But you did the one, and that was
I did.
yeah.
I did.
Yeah, I think there's, and again, I talk about this a lot, there's kind of like a richness in embracing all of the human experience. And I think that was something, again, the principles even taught me. It's like, we don't need to be frightened of our experience of life. And I always talk about Jeff Foster, because I love Jeff Foster's kind of poetry and things like that. And that's what I took from that, was like, actually, yeah, there is fear there, and it's not like we're trying to avoid that. It's like kind of embracing it. There's a richness to that, I feel.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, that's cool. So desire as a compass. Yeah. So I guess it's kind of sensing into our desires, and you talk a lot about kind of waking the wild. And so I'm kind of curious, because it feels like living from desire is kind of that wildness. Would you
Yes.
say? Yeah.
Yes, very much so. And again, this is what I see is the difference between, in our culture, like, the vast majority of us, may as well say all of us, but I never like to be too black and white, but almost all of us would have had serious conditioning that would have taught us the way to behave, to stay safe and acceptable and to fit in. And the irony of it is that often that kind of unique gift that we are is often that way of expressing that would have received the most feedback about it needing to be a certain way, or even sometimes it just absolutely not welcome at all.
Say that again. That feels really, yeah.
So if I can give I'll give an example actually from my own life, and I think I shared this in Unraveling the Body, which was, I probably didn't have quite so much early conditioning as most people, just because my upbringing was actually quite wild. And part of my unique expression is very much kind of creating from love, creating from the heart, and connecting with other people. And I had an experience, kind of early teenager, sort of around the age of 13, where I'd written a poem about the class and like a little line about everyone in the class, and stood up and read it out. thinking, you know, it's a real celebration of each of them, you know, like
Yeah.
speaking about the unique, like, I guess, again, talking about the unique gift that each of them
Yeah,
were.
I love that.
And I finished it thinking I was going to look around and see this like beaming smiles, and then saw the absolute opposite and just had that moment of like, oh, that's desperately uncool, totally
Oh,
unwelcome, not the right thing to do.
yeah.
And so that part of that unique gift that I am at that point was really shown to be clearly like, that's not welcome, close that down.
Mm.
For many people, that message came a lot earlier. I was quite lucky that for me it came a lot later. Often that's happened. In fact, I was with a client earlier and we were talking about something similar, and her, I guess that conditioning came from when she was
Wow.
two, which is, I
Yeah.
think, get probably on the early side to even be able to like make contact with it, but probably is actually not unusual. It just happens that she's got a reason why she knows it was that young. But from there, it's, we are going to, because we've got this kind of real, you know, again, human like primal needs, desire to stay safe, stay loved, we
Mm.
are going to act out whatever's going to keep us that way.
Yeah.
And so we are tamed, and
Mm.
it's the way that we're going to make it through the world. It's how we survive, so it's not kind of making that wrong, but
Yeah.
it really makes it very, very hard to be in touch with that wildness that we are.
So
And
we
I very
kind
much
of end up,
see,
yeah, we kind of end up kind of dishonoring our truth then, I guess.
yes, and it, again, completely understandable. How could we do
Mm.
anything else? Like, it's so important for us to be kept safe and loved. And yet from there, it, and again, that's why it becomes very hard to hear the desire of our soul, because it's not safe to even hear that.
Mm.
We know that could lead us astray. And so hence why this work isn't about kind of like, okay, now you know you've got a soul, now you know you can listen to its desire, go listen to it. This very much is a kind of gentle process of like welcoming ourselves back into our bodies, into our
Mm.
soul, into our connection with the earth. And I think that's a really important part of this. The more that we are in connection with our natural wild environment here on this planet, the more we start to experience ourselves through that lens too.
Yeah, I love that. And I love on your Facebook, you always have kind of something that you're creating, whether it's like kombucha or you've come across some like magical thing in nature, or you're creating your programs, which are amazing. And yeah, you're just this kind of creative powerhouse. So is that kind of really the secret? Is that kind of heart-led desire, I guess, and allowing yourself to be the wildest, truest version of or expression of who you want to be.
Mm. And I think this is, if there's one message that I think really needs to come along with this, is that although the idea of it's scary,
Mm.
because or everything we've just said about the fact we've been tamed and we've been shown it's safe to be tamed, what I've seen over and over, and this is both personally but also people that I've led on this journey too, is the more that we're coming from that wild place, the
Mm.
safer it actually is.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, it doesn't seem to lead us astray.
yeah.
I remember doing a webinar for Lucy Bainbridge's group a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about, what were we talking about? Maybe pleasure. Oh, I know, it was to do with letting life be sweet. And then I was talking about this idea of similar to what we were talking about here, but from a different lens, and very much kind of allowing us to be in what I describe as like the feminine energy, the archetypal energy of the feminine, rather than the masculine energy, the linear energy that this modern world's kind of trained us to be in.
Mm.
And she asked a question that was something along the lines of, and do you find that the results are just as good? And first of all, I said, like, well, it's funny because even like the word results is very much again sort of talking to that same
Yeah.
idea of like masculine, like results and numbers and kind of like, is it producing? And I said, so like, first and foremost, that's not really how I tend to kind of look at life these days. But then, hey, we're in this realm that does. So it's not like I take no notice if it is. But if it's not really to me the indicator, again, for me, it's so much about kind of like is this like a gorgeous, juicy, fun experience of life? That's the measure I use. But hey,
Yeah.
if I were to look at it through this lens of, you know, does it still allow us to be liked and loved and make money and, I don't know, live in a beautiful place? Hell yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
And
like
that's very much
it
what I
doesn't cost us those things.
Yeah, that's very much what I found. And I remember listening to one of your podcast episodes where you talked about how desire was kind of a calling for us to express as all that we are. And that really spoke to me. I love that.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, but I also love that you've just talked about the kind of feminine and masculine, because again, working with you, I've had kind of a powerful insight about kind of, because when I was younger, I had chronic fatigue syndrome. So for a long time, I kind of avoided doing and I avoided kind of structure and routine and all the kind of masculine elements in a way. And then kind of speaking to you, I realized actually we don't need to do that. It's almost about finding a balance
Mm.
between kind of honoring the wild feminine and the masculine as well. So I don't know whether it's worth touching on that or whether that's kind of just taking us off in a completely different direction. But it
Mm.
was an interesting one.
What I would say, we probably don't have time to
Yeah.
really do it justice, but what I would say is, I think again, the more that we're coming from our hearts, this kind of like wild sense of who we really are, the more we can be in sovereign discernment
Mm,
about how we want to show up. Like we can make choices that really serve us. We're not making them from fear, which includes, um, for example, I tend to see that my clients are either like way over in the masculine, like all structure, all results, all push, or they've kind of had an experience of that. And often it will be health related where they've got like, no, that's dangerous. That made me
yeah.
ill. I'm going to do all the way over here and have no structure, be absolutely allergic to structure. Like one client actually didn't even have any form of like electronic diary calendar or anything like that. So they like can be right over there.
Yeah.
And again, really this path is about having this openness to like seeing what is it I choose?
Yeah.
What's going to serve me in this being the gift that I am?
Yeah.
I don't have to do anything because I'm not being
Yeah.
kind of like not reacting to the life.
Yeah.
I often I don't actually know where this phrase came from. It's on one of my divine feminine cards, but I think it's actually a saying, but I love it. And it's something like, everything is material for my liberation.
Mm,
And the more that we're able to play in this planet, seeing like all of this, everything that happens is material for my liberation, or so differently, a
yeah.
way we can make art with the world. Again,
Oh,
we're
I
from
love
that
that.
place of choice. Like, how do I want to play? How do I want to show up? I don't
Yeah.
have to be either.
Yeah, I love that. And that's again kind of my experience of just kind of delving into all of these kind of different understandings was it dropped me out of a place of need and into a place of choice. So
Mm,
I really love that actually. Because it's about us kind of showing up and dancing, I guess, from desire as who we desire to be.
yes. Yeah.
That's very cool. I don't know if it's worth opening up to questions in case there are any questions. Does anybody want to come on live to ask a question? So you can raise your hand if you do, or drop a comment in the comments box. There may not be anyone, in which case we can carry on talking. But yeah, does anybody want to come on and ask Lian something? Not getting anything at the moment, but maybe there will be something soon.
I tell you what I can do in the meantime while we're seeing if anything wants to come up is share something that's might seem a bit left field maybe, but more and more again alongside this idea of really being in deep connection with the wild world out there, which very much is that kind of language of the soul. I often talk about my tree, my special tree, and how when we create this like deep relationship with wild beings, in my case it's my tree, it can be all sorts of other ways of connecting with wild beings, we start to, it's not even think, in fact there's a really beautiful quote that I've got it quite handy, so I'm going to share it in a sec.
Yeah.
it really speaks to that it's not even a way of thinking, it's a way of feeling, a way of like understanding the world. And the more that we're in communion with the wild world, but also the language of like myths and poetry, all different kinds of art, it's like we start to attune to the world from a different place.
Mm.
And let me just find this quote. Here we go. um, Carl Jung describes an encounter with a Native American chief, Mountain Lake. This is New Mexico in 1932. And he says, I was able to talk with him as I've rarely been able to talk with a European, Jung recalled. Chief Mountain Lake. And then he says a whole bunch of stuff that we're going to fast forward on because it's not that relevant. But right at the end, he says, he's talking about white people. And he said, we do not know what they want. We do not understand them. We think that they are all mad. When Jung asked why he thinks they're all mad, Mountain Lake replied, they say they think with their heads. Why, of course, said Jung. What do you think with? We think here, said Chief Mountain Lake, indicating his heart. And oh my goodness, I just love that. And everything I've seen and heard about people who are still in contact with their wild selves talk about things like that, talk about a way of being that isn't this kind of like just attuning to the world through our thoughts. It's attuning from our whole self, our bodies, our hearts. It's just being in communion in a completely different way.
Yeah.
And for us, that's going to take, you know, again, for us that have been raised in this modern culture, that's going to take some real intention to reclaim. I absolutely think it's possible. But again, the reason I said this is I think I talked about this idea of getting in touch with the wild world, but also, you know, myth, poetry. I'm looking over there because I've got stacks and stacks of poetry books over there. Like anything that like takes us out of that kind of linear thought and into this just like world of like myth and imagination and feeling and being is that kind of like invitation back into our wildness.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing to think that we're even kind of conditioned that we think with our heads.
Yes.
Like,
That's what I just love that quote. I
yeah.
read it in a book this week, and I made a note of it because we're just in the midst of opening our program Waking the Wild Heart that starts in September, and I'm like, wow, perfect quote. Like at some point I'll probably quote that in Wake the Wild Heart, so it just happens it's fresh, but I just thought it speaks to it so beautifully. Like we think they're mad, they think with their heads.
That's amazing. No, I love that. Yeah.
It really does make you realize like, there is a different way of being.
Yeah.
Completely different, to the point where other cultures would think we were mad for thinking that's the way to be, that's the way to think.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because when I was writing my book, I talked a lot about kind of what we learn from indigenous cultures and things like that, because before they were kind of, you know, they weren't in their heads, like you say, and so that kind of makes that point again. It's like, no, our kind of true wild nature is not to overthink things.
Totally. Yeah, ascension and descension, like nailed, absolutely
Yeah.
nailed.
I love that. I'm just trying to think if there was anything else that I was going to ask you about, because I know we talked about pleasure today.
No, we haven't. And
because does that tie into desire?
Very much so. And I think I often teach on them as kind of like two separate like classes, for example, if I'm doing it in some kind of program. Clearly there's a link between the two, and I think it can be that for some the portal into desire can be through this lens of pleasure, like reclaiming our connection to seeing like, well, if we don't have pleasure, really what's the point?
Yeah.
And again, we tend to talk about pleasure in this quite commoditized way, like we see it as like, I don't know, Netflix or a chocolate cake or alcohol. It's not to say like they don't have pleasure, but when we really start to like think, what is it that brings me pleasure? Often it's actually really sensual. And again, the more we get back in touch with our body, the more that is how we experience pleasure, like really just like pure sensual pleasure. And so to me, that is, again, part of us living this gorgeous, like really alive life is through this lens of like having our full sensual capacity come alive, but also it can be a kind of route back into desire. It kind
Mm.
of like is that sort of like nice little breadcrumb path that like as we start to attune back to like what brings us pleasure, it just takes us back into our bodies. And from
Yeah.
there, we are able to feel what we desire again.
Yeah, I love that. It's really funny because when I first came across the principles, I kind of rejected all self-help that I'd ever kind of dived into, because I'd spent a lot of time diving into self-help. And so I rejected it for a while. So I rejected yoga and meditation, which I was trained to teach, and you know, all of that sort of stuff. But then I suddenly realized, well, why would I just reject it? Because just because I don't need it doesn't mean I don't desire it, and it doesn't give me pleasure. So now I kind of, yeah, I love yoga. It was like, why did I do that? Why did I kind of deny myself the pleasure of yoga for thinking that I didn't need it? I realized that there was that choice again. But I
Mm.
think we so often do that, even, you know, without kind of diving into self-help and things, is we kind of disallow ourselves pleasure. It feels like that's not something that's a priority in today's kind
Yes,
of society. Yeah.
totally. And again, going back to this idea that we live in a culture that prizes productivity, results, like there's a reason to be doing something. And pleasure seems very frivolous in comparison. It's like, we don't need that. It's not going to add up to this idea of like more, better, faster.
Yeah.
And I think actually it was one of the things that we looked at in Unraveling the Body. And I asked, what was your kind of childhood modeling and teaching and messaging around pleasure? And the things I hear people say over and over again are things like it was to be earned, as in after you'd done something, you might then be allowed to have some pleasure as a kind of reward. And even then, it was in small doses. And
Yeah.
so this is how we're allowed to be with it. It's not even like this, like, why can't we just live from pleasure? But no, that doesn't work in this masculine world. We're told like, no, focus, be serious, get this stuff done. And then you might be able to have a bit of pleasure, like you're kind of
Yeah.
pudding after your dinner. And so, yeah, I think through that idea of it doesn't have a place, it becomes, yeah, just unnecessary and like can be even taboo. And I just, which is quite sad, isn't it? Again, when you think
Mm.
of what our lives would be like with all of that pleasure stripped away, what would be the point?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And that's why I think I love when you talk about kind of embracing our and a humanness and soul, because like what's the point of kind of being in these bodies? And I remember when somebody said, you know, every thought's a gift. It is. And it's like, well, why would we want to kind of transcend all of that in a way?
Yeah,
It just,
yeah.
yeah, doesn't make
We've
sense.
got time for all of that. After whatever comes after this, we've got time for that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And we may only get it once, or we may get it many times.
Mm.
So,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. But why not just make the most of what we've got now
yeah,
here? Mm.
exactly. And I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think what I find is the more fun I have, and the more pleasure I have, and the more I do live from that kind of heart-led desire, the more kind of creation happens kind of through me. And often that does, like you say, kind of lead to more success. I think when we get very much caught in what we think we should do, it's almost the opposite. And I've had very strong, like, no, that isn't the way.
Mm.
And like you said, kind of listening to that more often does give us what the kind of masculine successes that we're looking for as well, in a way. So
Yes.
I feel like that's kind of your experience as well, because you're kind of this creative powerhouse, and it feels like it just happens through you or as you. I've always heard you talk about kind of creation happening as you, and but you say lots of different ways, like through you, as you. I don't know whether you kind of want to break that down a bit, because
Yeah,
that's always
sure.
something I've been
This
curious about.
isn't original to me. This is ripping off Michael Beckwith, and he's not actually talking about creation when he talks about it. He talks about, I think he calls it the four kingdoms of consciousness, I think. And so he talks about it as life happening to you. So that's very much when in that sense of I'm a victim to life. Stuff's
Mm.
happening to me and ouch, it hurts and I don't like it.
Yeah.
And then I think the next way he describes it is by me. And so it's almost like we're kind of like witnessing it happen. The next stage is through me, which is that sense we're almost kind of getting like, oh yeah, here I am, almost like a channel and life's coming through me.
Yeah.
And then and again, all of these aren't exactly like solid states where we're going to be there all the time. But what I see is the more that we are open to life, we start to get more and more of a taste of this is all of it is happening as me, moment to moment, all of this experience. And even like the other person I'm talking to, the other person I'm co-creating with, whatever's being created, all of this is happening as me, which is, again, it's quite paradoxical to talk about, but it goes very much back to that Rumi quote again. It's like we really get that sense of the ocean is showing up in this moment as me in the form of this drop.
Wow. Ooh, I love that.
Mm.
You always say something so profound that's like blows my mind.
Thank you. But again, that's Michael Beck, but it's not mine.
Well, you're always such an explorer that you come out with all of these quotes that I haven't come across. So no, that's amazing. Yeah. I'm just kind of wondering where to go from there. I don't know if anybody has any questions now, just before it's actually near enough the hour. So
And it's flown by.
I know it's been really, really juicy. I don't know if there's anything else that you kind of want to dive into as well that you feel would be useful. But if anybody does have a question, again, you're welcome to pop it into the group chat or raise your hand and come on just before we finish. But I'll read some of the comments actually. Michelle says, it's lovely to hear someone who has such a love for being human. It should be everything to us to be around other souls who are filled with love and joy and love. I know that's all I aspire to be, around like-minded souls. Yeah, Olivia says, I do it with supplements. I can't remember what that was. I think I was sensing. I think I was when we were talking about senses. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Really good example. Yeah. That's a quote. I do it with supplements.
Yeah. Yeah. She said yes, that was it. Just to clarify.
Very wise. Very wise.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to kind of dive into.
Let me think. I think I would like, if it's okay with you, to end with one of my favorite poems.
Yes, go for it.
Because again, I don't just talk about this idea of, really diving into myth and poetry and then don't like live that myself. To me, this very much is like how I live. And again, this idea of if life's happening as us, whether it's us that's creating or us consuming and reading, it's still life happening as us. Like in this moment, we're co-creating the experience of me reading one of my favorite Mary Oliver poems.
Yeah,
it's still life happening as us. And this, I just found it and then lost it again. Give me a moment. This is one of my all-time favorite poems, and I quote one of the lines in it like over and over again because it just is one of those touchstones that I think this really is, in a nutshell, everything I've been talking about is in this poem and in this particular line. And I'm kind of now stalling. Here it is, like 3, 4, 7, right, okay. I've got no head for numbers, so I looked up the number and then talked and forgot the number. Okay, here we go. Excellent. Okay, really recommend this, by the way. So
I know, I love Mary Oliver.
Wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees. the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
That's gorgeous. What a
I get chills I mean, I must have read that, I don't even know how many times, but that particular line I quote in all sorts of kind of paraphrased version, horribly paraphrased actually. Probably rolls in her grave every time she hears me. But that line, you only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves.
Yeah.
And even more simply put, like when we let ourselves love what we love, we don't go far wrong.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What a gorgeous way to end. Thank you so much. That's
Thank
really
you for letting me do
gorgeous.
that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love poetry. And actually it's funny because kind of poetry is something that expresses as me quite often, and it just kind of comes from nowhere. So that's kind of my way of sensing into even what that means. So
Yeah.
that was really beautiful for you to share that. Thank you. Yeah, and I guess yeah, just thank you for sharing today. And is there stuff that you're working on, because I know you're working on all sorts of amazing things that you'd like to share? It's just an invitation for you to kind of share with people. I always drop the links as well into the member vault, so that people can find out more about you. So if you want to share those as well, so that people know how to find you. Yeah.
Sure. So we have a weekly free podcast that you've already mentioned. I won't give links for this because I'm assuming you'll have all those, so I'll just mention them without giving links. So I have a free weekly podcast. And coming up in terms of programs, we've got Wake the Wild Heart that I've just mentioned, which is oh my goodness, I'm so excited about this. Is the first one of its kind, and I don't yet know exactly what it's going to be. We're kind of creating this as we go, but it's going to be an exploration into some of the things we've been talking about here, like back into our hearts, back into living as love, and also very much from the lens of intimate relationships. So pleasure, polarity, sensuality. So it is going to be absolutely amazing. And it's the first program that Jonathan, my business partner, and I have co-led for many years. And so we love working together. And we've just been like we're constantly working together, but not leading programs together. This is the first one we've done in years. So that's happening. It's just kind of open for enrollment. And that's in September. And then I've got the next Wake and Wild Feminine, which I've mentioned a few times, and that's happening in November. I can't remember the date, but some point in November. And it's hard to even do justice. Like, it is just magical, absolutely magical. It is powerful beyond words. And I say this as if I'm saying like it's amazing because of me. It so isn't because of me. I actually don't even know what creates the magic that it is, but it is absolutely incredible. It's just really so much what we've been talking about here, this like real return to soul and to our bodies, and like living from that wild self. So if any of what I've been talking about kind of like is calling to you, and again, all of this is about like feeling what's for you, then go check that out.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, and definitely I would recommend your podcast. It's amazing. There's loads of great stuff on that as well. So thank you very much for joining us tonight as well. I'm just going to make some announcements about the next speakers and things. So if you need to head off, then feel free, and I'll just finish off with who's up next.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yeah, just for anybody who is joining us next week, we've got next Friday, the 24th of July, at the same time, we have the wonderful Billy Mann, who's here to share about how life is a gift to be celebrated. We also have the week after, we've got the wonderful Jules and Rudy Kennard joining us to explore as well, which I'm very excited about. Can't wait for those two gorgeous souls. And just as always, a final invitation. My next programs, we talked a little bit about the Self-Rediscovery School. We have the next enrollments are in October. So we have the Foundations program, which is all about kind of that ascension, seeing who we really are, sensing into our wisdom, and then kind of the Unraveling a Life We Love, which is very much more about embracing our humanness. And so you can either kind of register your interest or sign up to secure your spot, because there's limited spaces, but it's always a lot of fun. We've got the current round of Self-Rediscovery Foundations going on at the moment, and we just had week 3, which was really beautiful. It's really funny. We always reach a point where the group kind of goes quiet as they drop into this kind of feeling of wisdom, really. So we've had that week this week, and it's just gorgeous. I love all the insights that people are unraveling, and yeah, again, like Lian said, it was very much unraveled from that kind of joyful desire. Was again that creation as me. It's not something I would say that I intended to create. So it's beautiful when to have a kind of that feeling. Yeah, so if anybody's interested, again, you can reach out. I love exploring with how I can help people. So you're welcome to reach out if you want to explore which journeys for you, how I can support you in your journey. I also offer one-to-ones. And as usual, I'm always hanging around in the Self-Rediscovery group on Facebook. I've been a bit quiet recently. I've been, because we're renovating our new home. But yeah, always there to kind of answer questions, hold your hand through anything that you're kind of struggling with, and help you see something different. But hopefully we'll see you next week. We'll have another fun conversation. That one was, again, one of my favorites with Lian. So hope you all enjoyed it as well. And I will see you next week. Lots of love.